Does Israel really want war with Iran? That is the question people keep asking. But I think the deeper issue is that most people still misunderstand what this conflict actually is. People keep imagining this as a simple hatred conflict. Israel hates Iran, Iran hates Israel, end of story. But that is not how countries think. That is not how civilizations behave. Countries do not survive for decades in dangerous neighborhoods by acting on emotions. They survive by carefully calculating power, survival, geography, and long-term positioning. And once you understand that, the entire situation starts looking very different. Iran does not wake up every morning thinking about destroying Israel. Iran wakes up every morning thinking about survival. That is the first principle here, survival. Everything else comes after that. Iran is surrounded by American military bases. Iraq, Syria, the Gulf, Afghanistan for years. Naval fleets everywhere. Economic sanctions, assassinations, cyber warfare, intelligence operations. The Iranian government understands very clearly that the moment it makes one catastrophic mistake, the entire system could collapse. So when people talk about Iran like it is irrational, I think they fundamentally misunderstand what allows governments to survive under this kind of pressure for so long. And honestly, the same thing applies to Israel. Israel is not irrational either. Israel understands exactly what Iran is capable of becoming if left unchecked. A fully developed, technologically advanced Iran with nuclear weapons and enormous regional influence would permanently change the balance of power in the Middle East. Israel understands that better than anyone. So the goal is not necessarily destruction. The goal is management, containment, delay, pressure, and exhaustion. Keep Iran unstable enough that it spends its energy just trying to survive instead of expanding its power. And this is where the conversation becomes much larger than religion, because people simplify the Middle East into ancient hatred. Sunni versus Shia, Muslims versus Jews, clash of civilizations. But geopolitics is almost always about systems of power. Underneath all that ideological language, religion matters. Of course it does. But religion also becomes the tool through which deeper strategic interests get organized. And if you remove emotion from the equation for just a second, you realize something very important. Israel and Iran are both acting rationally according to their own understanding of survival. Now, this is where America enters the picture. Because without America, the entire regional equation changes immediately. Israel's military strength is deeply connected to American financial support, intelligence support, diplomatic protection, and technological partnership. Iran understands this perfectly. Which means from Iran's perspective, Israel is not simply Israel. Israel is the front structure of the American order in the Middle East. That distinction changes everything. Because once you understand that, you realize this conflict is not fundamentally about territory. It is about regional architecture. Who gets to define the Middle East for the next 100 years? And honestly, I think people underestimate how much the Gulf states matter here. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, these countries are not side characters in this story. They are central to it, especially the UAE, because the UAE represents something extremely dangerous from Iran's perspective. The UAE represents a successful alternative model for the entire region. Wealthy, modernized, globally connected, open to Western investment, building trade networks, tourism, artificial intelligence, finance, and infrastructure. The UAE is effectively showing the Muslim world a competing civilizational vision. And this matters psychologically far more than people realize, because ideological competition becomes much more dangerous when it comes from societies that share the same cultural and religious roots. Iran can frame Israel as foreign, as an outsider, as Western. But the Gulf states are different. The Gulf states demonstrate that a Muslim society can integrate with the global economy without adopting the revolutionary model that Iran promotes. And from Iran's perspective, that creates a direct threat to its long-term ideological influence across the entire region. Now think about what this means strategically. Iran funds armed groups across multiple countries: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. Not because Iran randomly enjoys chaos, but because building strategic influence networks is how weaker powers survive against stronger coalitions. If your enemies can surround you with conventional military force, Then you create influence networks that force them to fight in unconventional ways instead. This is basic geopolitical logic, and Israel understands this as well, which is why Israel constantly targets supply chains, military commanders, missile programs, infrastructure, and intelligence routes. The objective is not immediate victory. The objective is gradual weakening over time. And honestly, modern war itself has changed in ways most people still do not fully understand. People imagine wars the way they looked in the 20th century. Massive invasions, armies crossing borders, flags being planted in foreign soil. But modern conflict is increasingly economic, technological, informational, and psychological, all at the same time. You can cripple a country without fully invading it. You can destroy energy systems, banking systems, ports, infrastructure, cyber networks, and shipping routes. You can make normal life impossible without technically conquering any territory. And this is why the Iran and Israel conflict is so dangerous. Because both sides are operating inside a globalized system where pressure spreads instantly across the entire planet. Think about oil for a second. If a direct regional war erupts seriously, energy markets explode overnight. The cost of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz skyrockets. European economies suffer immediately. Asian manufacturing suffers immediately. Inflation surges globally. Food prices rise. Governments destabilize. Financial markets panic. This is why the world watches every missile strike so nervously. Because everyone understands that a regional escalation could trigger worldwide economic consequences within days. But underneath all of this is something even larger. The global order itself is becoming unstable. And I think this is the real hidden strategy that people fail to see. Israel and Iran are both operating during a period where American dominance no longer feels absolute, and that changes behavior dramatically. Because throughout history, the most dangerous periods are always the moments of transition between global powers. When one empire is clearly dominant, most countries behave cautiously because the rules are understood. But when the dominant power begins weakening while rivals begin rising, everyone starts recalculating at the same time. Look at China. China is expanding economically across Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Look at Russia becoming increasingly aggressive after years of feeling strategically cornered. Look at countries questioning the dollar system itself. Countries building alternative trade networks, alternative payment systems, and alternative alliances. The world is slowly breaking apart into competing blocs again. And during periods like this, regional conflicts become much more explosive. Because every local struggle starts connecting into the larger question of who holds global power in the future. Now, this is where history becomes extremely important, because people often imagine the current world order as something natural. But it is not natural, it was built carefully. Gradually, through war, finance, industry, colonial extraction, and global trade systems developed over centuries. The British Empire extracted enormous wealth from India, Africa, and China. Entire populations were economically reorganized to fuel imperial expansion. And eventually, much of that financial power shifted toward the United States as America grew into a continental superpower. That transition did not happen by accident. Capital follows power, infrastructure, stability, industrial growth, strategic geography. And over time, the United States became the center of the post-World War II financial order. The dollar became the global reserve currency. American naval power secured trade routes. American banks became central to global finance. American military alliances spread across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. But the interesting thing about global systems is that they eventually create internal contradictions. Wealth concentrates, inequality rises, elite factions emerge with competing interests. Ordinary populations begin feeling disconnected from the institutions governing them. And once that process accelerates, political systems become emotionally unstable. Look at American politics right now. Everything feels like the end of the world. Every election feels like a life or death battle. Every side views the other not simply as wrong, but as fundamentally illegitimate. And historically, that is always a warning sign. Because when internal elite conflict intensifies, long-term strategic thinking begins collapsing. Political factions become obsessed with defeating each other, even if it weakens the entire system in the process. And this is what people mean when they talk about imperial decline. It does not mean immediate collapse. It means institutional unity slowly eroding from within. And once great powers begin turning inward psychologically, regional actors start testing the boundaries. Iran sees opportunities, Russia sees opportunities, China sees opportunities. Even medium-sized powers begin behaving more independently because confidence in the existing order weakens. This is why the Middle East feels so unstable right now. Not because the region suddenly became irrational, but because the larger system enforcing stability appears less certain than before. Now think about Israel from this perspective. Israel understands that its long-term security depends on maintaining regional superiority before the balance shifts too far. Time matters enormously here. Demographics matter, technology matters, economic alliances matter, missile capabilities matter, artificial intelligence matters, drone warfare matters. Israel cannot simply think about today. Israel has to think 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead, because once regional powers fully equalize technologically, the strategic environment becomes much more dangerous. And Iran understands this too, which is why Iran invests so heavily in missile systems, drone technology, underground facilities, cyber warfare, and proxy networks. Iran knows it cannot defeat America using conventional military force. It cannot defeat Israel using conventional military force. So instead, it builds layered deterrence. Make the cost of attacking Iran unbearably high. That is the strategy, not conquest, deterrence. Survival through making escalation too risky for the other side. And this is where the nuclear conversation becomes very interesting. Because people constantly talk about nuclear war, as though governments casually want to use these weapons. But nuclear weapons are fundamentally psychological tools. Their primary purpose is deterrence. Once nuclear weapons are actually used, the entire geopolitical landscape changes in unpredictable ways. Financial systems panic, alliances fracture, public psychology changes permanently. Every government on earth immediately begins recalculating its own survival strategy. So when people casually talk about Israel or Iran crossing that threshold, I honestly think they underestimate how terrifying that scenario would be for every major power involved. And this is why most conflicts stay inside controlled escalation patterns, missile strikes, assassinations, cyber attacks, proxy warfare, economic sanctions, psychological pressure. Each side pushes carefully without fully crossing the line that could trigger uncontrollable consequences. But here is the dangerous part. Every side believes it understands exactly where that line is. Every side believes it controls the escalation. And historically, that confidence is exactly what makes major wars possible. Because history is filled with governments that believed they could manage the pressure until suddenly events spiraled beyond anyone's control. Europe before World War I looked economically interconnected too. Trade was booming. Financial systems were deeply integrated. Many educated people believed that large-scale war had become completely irrational. Then one assassination triggered alliance systems that nobody could fully stop once they were activated. Human beings consistently overestimate their ability to control large systems when they're under stress. And honestly, I think this is the real hidden strategy behind Israel and Iran. It is not simply about defeating each other militarily. It is about positioning themselves advantageously inside a changing global order. Both sides understand that the world entering the next 20 years may look completely different from the world that existed after the Cold War. American dominance may weaken. China may rise further. Energy systems may shift. Artificial intelligence may transform military power. Populations may become more politically unstable. Climate pressures may intensify migration and competition over resources. Nobody knows exactly what the future system looks like yet. And when civilizations become uncertain about the future, they become much more aggressive about securing leverage in the present. That is what people are really witnessing right now, not random chaos. Strategic positioning during a period of systemic transition. Iran wants leverage, Israel wants leverage, America wants leverage, China wants leverage, Russia wants leverage. Everyone senses instability approaching at the same time. And that creates an incredibly dangerous psychological environment across the entire globe. Now connect this to ordinary people. Most citizens are not thinking about civilization cycles or geopolitical architecture. They are thinking about inflation, housing, food prices, debt, jobs, social tension, and safety. But all of those pressures are connected to the same larger instability. When global systems weaken, daily life becomes more psychologically stressful. People lose trust in institutions. Conspiracy theories spread. Political polarization increases. Governments become more authoritarian. Social cohesion weakens. Fear spreads through entire populations. And leaders under pressure often become more willing to direct conflict outward. Because foreign threats can temporarily unite fractured societies internally. This is one reason geopolitical escalation becomes more likely during periods of domestic instability. External enemies become politically useful. They create narratives of unity, survival, and national purpose. And every major power uses this dynamic to some extent. Because fear is one of the strongest organizing forces in politics. Always has been. Probably always will be. So when people ask whether Israel wants to destroy Iran or whether Iran wants to destroy Israel, I think they are still asking the wrong question. The deeper question is this: what happens when multiple powers simultaneously believe the future global order is becoming unstable? Because instability changes decision-making. Fear changes decision-making. Civilizations under pressure begin taking risks they would normally avoid. And the most dangerous moments in history usually occur when several major actors all convince themselves they are acting defensively at the same time. Iran believes it is defending itself. Israel believes it is defending itself. America believes it is defending its order. China believes it is defending its rise. Russia believes it is defending its sphere of influence. Everyone sees themselves as the rational actor surrounded by threats. And once every major civilization begins thinking that way simultaneously, the margin for miscalculation becomes terrifyingly small. That is the real danger here, not irrationality. Rational escalation, step by step, pressure by pressure, sanction by sanction, missile by missile, each side calculating, each side adapting, each side convinced it can manage the consequences, until suddenly the system reaches a point where nobody actually controls what happens next anymore. And history shows something very uncomfortable about civilizations. Most societies do not recognize the turning point while they are living through it. They only understand later, after the systems fail, after the alliances collapse, after the war spread, after the order that once seemed permanent suddenly disappears. That is usually when civilizations finally realize that the world they thought was stable had already started ending long before anyone was willing to admit it. If this kind of deep analysis is what you are looking for, make sure you are following along, because this conversation is far from over.